bit better, I guess, where your priorities are, what your preferences are, and we'll really use that feedback to help shape, future sessions. I think some of the things that we're quite keen to understand are, I guess, what kind of format you prefer for the session, how much detail you are interested in. So we do encourage all of you to engage with us throughout the session. We've got the chat function here, so feel free to, pop any questions here as part of that. I think also just want to briefly introduce the ENA team that we've got here as well. So we've got Evie, who is our technical lead. We've got Connor, who's our junior project manager, and Helen, who's our project coordinator. So all of us will be here available on the chat to help answer some of your questions. So if we move on to the next slide. So in terms of our agenda for today, so I'll kick off with a bit of an overview of the program and the role of the Dissemination Forum. And then from that point onwards, we'll then kind of start to talk about the different areas of work that we've got. So this is going to be delivered by our work stream chairs that have also joined us here today. And within each of these, we'll be covering some of the key developments that we've made across some of our products. And then finally, in the end, we'll have an update on some of our upcoming comms activity, and we'll have, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll have Slido questions throughout the session that we'd encourage you all to engage with. Okay, so I think if you go to the next slide, so in terms of getting the Slido set up, so we were actually kicking off with a question just to give everyone a chance to kind of sign up to the to Slido and start with some feedback. So I think really the first question that we've got, we just want to really understand how familiar people are with the Open Networks program. So this will really help us kind of tailor the session for all of you. So I think if you can all just take a moment to log in, and I think Connor, if you open the other screen, we can see the responses as they start to come through. Are we able to see how many responses we've actually got so far, Connor? Oh yeah,
total of 21 so far.
Yeah. So I think we're seeing lots of threes here. So I guess people are somewhat familiar with it, but perhaps I guess some, maybe not as familiar with some of the detail that we've got. So I think it seems to have stabilized at 23. So I think we're getting some more responses. I think what we can do is we can leave this open in the background until we get to the next question. But I think it sounds like people are broadly familiar with open networks. So I think it'll be quite helpful. So I think the next item on the agenda that we've got is a bit more of an overview. So I think this is to kind of give you guys a bit more of a background on open networks, and I guess what we're setting out to achieve. So hopefully that will help to give a bit more background to everyone. So I'll cover this this section today. So think broadly, like I guess starting with Energy Networks Association. So we're the trade association that represents electricity and gas networks in the UK and in Ireland. And we run a number of strategic projects on behalf of our electricity and gas members. And Open Networks is one of the key programs that we run for our members. If you go to the next one. So before we talk a bit more about the project, I always like to kind of just touch on the energy landscape and just to kind of explain, like I guess where Open Networks has really come from. So the project was set up 5 years ago, and that was basically to address some of the challenges that we were seeing at the time in the energy landscape, mostly driven by, the 3Ds being decarbonization, digitalization, and decentralization. Since then, we have seen the UK government commit to net zero, and more recently, we have seen a commitment to have a fully decarbonized power system by 2035. So in light of that, we're basically the project's looking at how we can basically move away from that traditional one-way power system that we've had for many years, where you've got larger power generators sending energy downstream to customers. How we can move away from that to a more smart and flexible energy system that can incorporate renewables and can be operated in a more active and a more flexible way. So I think that's really kind of the background behind open networks. If you go to the next slide, Connor. So in a nutshell, the project's really looking at, how do we actually change the way we operate to become that smart and flexible energy system of the future? And really, what we are looking at as part of that is how we can open up local markets for flexibility. Now, flexibility is going to be a key part of that smart grid. So we are helping to open up those local markets for flexibility to renewable energy and demand response. We're also looking at how we can actually help customers connect faster to the network. We're also looking at ways in which we can open up data that would, enable customers to identify best locations they can invest in, and also help them provide, those flexibility services that their assets are able to provide. We're also looking at how, we can deliver efficiencies between network companies. Now, this is not just across, transmission and distribution and electricity. This also goes further to look at how we can actually deliver efficiencies across electricity and gas. Now, that is quite a broad remit of work that we're looking at within Open Networks. And to take each one of these forward, we've basically set up 6 different work streams across the program that you can see here on the bottom left-hand side. So as I mentioned in the slide earlier, the work of our program is really driven by the net zero mandate. Last year in June, we saw the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan come out. That's further reiterated the need for us to act and deliver change as quickly as possible. And there are a number of key actions in that plan that are assigned to Open Networks to take forward. So again, that is a key driver for us in our program. And also, quite central to the work that we do is feedback from our stakeholders and from the industry, as well as feedback from Ofgem and BASE. So in terms of the approach that we've taken with the project, so it's all about, I think, it's all about collaboration. So I mean, collaboration is really fundamental to this transition. We want to make sure we are delivering this transition with the industry, and and through the work that we are doing, we're helping to standardize processes, across the different network companies, and we're basically helping to make them simpler. So it is easier for people to participate and engage with the network companies and with the transition. We're also helping to bring more transparency in the way that we do things. And then, fairness is a key underlying principle for all the work that we do. So, we are trying to make sure that, in looking at this transition, we're not leaving anyone behind. So if you go to the next slide. So I guess with that background in mind, so we launched our work plan for Open Networks earlier this year. So that was, so we had several consultations last year, and, we've sought input from our challenge group members as well to help shape that. So across our program, we are looking at 24 different products across those 6, different work streams and areas of focus that I mentioned. We have over 90 deliverables planned to deliver this year. So it's definitely quite an ambitious scope, and it's going to be another busy year for the program. I mentioned the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan earlier. So that is one of our key priorities for Open Networks, basically delivering against that plan and making sure that, we are kind of delivering those actions in collaboration with the wider industry. In terms of the program objectives, so, we've got 3 core objectives. The first one is really, helping to deliver those open, transparent, accessible and efficient local markets for flexibility. There is quite a lot in there, but I think, flexibility is definitely a key area of focus for us in our program. Second objective is around, delivering more coordination across, the transmission and distribution boundary within electricity. And then the third objective is really more about stepping outside of electricity and looking across gas as well, and taking a more whole system approach. So if you go to the next slide. So I guess, how does the dissemination forum come in? So last year, we looked at our governance, and we had feedback from stakeholders telling us that they'd like us to basically find to look at ways in which we collaborate with the industry and perhaps look at different mechanisms for that. So taking that feedback on board and then working with the stakeholders as well, we identified some changes, and those changes have basically led us to creating 2 key stakeholder forums that we've got as part of our governance now. The first one is the Open Networks Challenge Group. Now, the challenge group is set up with key representatives from the industry, and really their role is to challenge, review, and shape the work that we do. So we've set that up through an open call for participation last year, and we recently kicked off the first session a few weeks ago. And then to complement that, we've also got a dissemination forum, which you're all here for today, and this is really to get that broader engagement across the program. It's really, it is open for anyone to join, and it meets quarterly. Like the aim of this forum, it's really to bring stakeholders up to speed with latest developments, key updates from across the program, and share key developments across the program. So I guess outside of these 2 forums, we've got a number of other stakeholder engagement mechanisms as well that we are continuing to utilize this year. So we've got across some of our core products, we've got a number of focus groups where we are bringing stakeholders to help us shape the detailed development of those areas. And from time to time, we've also got public consultations, webinars, workshops with stakeholders. So that's to kind of help us, inform some of the detail across, the program and help shape developments. So if you go to the final slide, Connor. Thank you. So I guess just to kind of recap the program and the different areas that we have. So, these are the 6 main work streams that we've got that, each of the work stream chairs will be talking to us about in a bit more detail. So at the top, we've got the Dso Transition that's taking ownership of the overarching Dso implementation plan, helping to make sure that, we are kind of making good progress along that. In the middle there, we've got our 4 core work streams, which are progressing, short to medium term developments on each of those areas. And then at the bottom, you can see we've got comms and stakeholder engagement, which is, another key area of work for us. It's helping to oversee stakeholder engagement, comms across the program. So I'll just stop here and see if there's any comments or any questions so far in the chat. I don't think we've got anything yet. So I guess with that, so I think we'll now move over to the next part of the agenda. So we've got Ben Godfrey, who is the chair for our flexibility work stream, and Ben will take us through what we've got planned for our flexibility work stream this year. So over to you, Ben.
Excellent. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Godfrey. I'm the chair of Workstream 1A, which looks after the elements of open networks that relate to flexibility and flexibility markets. So looking across flexibility, clearly an exciting topic for the electricity industry. Flexibility has been used by the electricity industry really since its initial inception about balancing supply and demand. But latterly, the focus has been on allowing all of the distributed generation connected down to the lower voltage levels to also participate in some of these markets and not only work for balancing services, balancing the overall supply and demand, but also looking at constraint management. And this really is the area that defines the difference between the sort of national markets that are looking at balancing services on a national basis and supplying the wholesale energy market and ensuring there's sufficient capacity, and then specifically looking at the DSO-led markets on distribution networks. And these are mainly around congestion management and also reactive power. And we've had some great success in creating products to be used by the distribution network and providing new and exciting revenue services that distributed and connected generation can tap into. There's also the potential for many of these services to be used and developed outside of distribution network operators, particularly with the advent of local community energy markets, peer-to-peer trading, and secondary trading opportunities. And these are all things that us as DNOs are keen on developing and driving through competition, as we would see that would share benefits with all of our existing customers as well. And we're trying to do that in a coordinated fashion through the Open Networks program, and looking at how we can standardize the approach and make it very simple and straightforward for those particular DER to participate. So on to the next slide. So we've got a very full and packed work program within Workstream 1A for 2022. And much of this is geared up to support the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, so that joint Ofgem and BEIS roadmap for how we're going to be creating a smarter, more flexible energy system. Facilitating the development of that local flexibility markets is a real key outcome for Open Networks. And we see one of the key drivers for doing that, one of the key enablers for doing that would be about standardization of approach, as well as simplifying, reducing barriers, and also building up confidence in the market, i.e. providing transparency in our decisions, ensuring that flexibility first as an approach is delivered upon, and making sure that those flexibility service providers who wish to participate in markets have very high confidence that they're being given the right opportunities and they can see how decisions are being made in order to progress flexibility versus other conventional solutions or mitigations that distribution network operators might be looking to solve constraints on the network. So there's a number of different pillars within Workstream 1A. Looking on the left hand of this slide, we've got the needs identification, the pre-procurement phases. So this relates to P1, product 1, which is the common evaluation methodology. This is a very transparent and deterministic tool that enables conventional reinforcement to be compared against flexibility options, and a full Ofgem compliant CBA can be undertaken, a cost benefit analysis, and this output of the common evaluation methodology tool can provide transparency on how long a particular constraint on the network might be able to be deferred through flexibility, looking at what the kind of price points for flexibility services might be within those particular areas, and really build an understanding about the longevity of flexibility and where the value of flexibility needs to be reflected in the market. So that's the common evaluation methodology, and we've built this as a tool through previous years of Open Networks, and now this product is very much about building in additional benefits and widening the reach of this common evaluation methodology tool, particularly to drive value within those markets for flexibility service providers. For the other product, flexibility products, then we've got P6, which is looking at further standardization of products. So we have got a standard core of 4 flexibility products based around real power services that are defined, agreed and standardized across all network operators. This product is very much about doing a horizon scan of other products that might need to be developed or existing products that might need to be tweaked to better facilitate participation. So seeking feedback from the market, making sure that everything is working for both network operators and also flexibility service providers, and ensuring that we've got a continued review process to make sure that the products that we're offering are really hitting the spot and delivering what is needed from the market and for the system. So the second pillar is about how we actually procurement processes, and this is P2 is about the standardization of procurement processes. So previous work that's been done within Open Networks has ensured that we all understand what we mean by procurement processes, and that is fed into some of the license conditions that are now requirements by network operators to provide a breakdown of their procurement processes. And then currently the P2 product is very much focusing on alignment between applicable ESO services, so for those that are nationally being procured, and but with a heavy focus on those products that would have a large level of participation from distribution networks, making sure that our procurement processes and timescales are coordinated between ESO and distribution products, and making sure that those recommendations are followed through and implemented. And then within this pillar, we also have the standard agreement, and this is a very core bit of Open Networks in delivering a flexibility agreement that is common across all network operators and common across the ESO for the applicable products that is being procured from distribution network connected assets. And this really aims at reducing the barriers to entry, so making sure that the contracts are fit for purpose, for as simple as possible, but provide the right amount of assurance for both parties, and making sure that there's a proper change process around these standardized agreements, so that we've got clarity that any participant looking to provide flexibility services across the whole of the UK will be using very standardized terms, and can reduce the kind of legal burden on FSPs looking to participate in that particular market. The third column there we've got is operations and settlement. This is another key area, making sure that we've got standardization across the approaches, and we've got a simplified approach. So taking the P3, the dispatch, interoperability and settlement, we recognise that distribution system operators are going to have to be interfacing with aggregators, virtual PowerPoint providers, marketplaces, exchanges. So we want to make sure that we've got a common understanding of the types of signals that need to be exchanged, the data mechanisms that need to be exchanged between those parties, and that can really help stimulate the market. Furthermore, we are also going to be taking a closer look at settlement and how that is enacted across the different DSOs, and making sure that we've got routes to converge on that. And that particularly follows on from the baselining work that we did last year to ensure that we've got a consistent way of judging delivery. And then once we've got a consistent way of judging delivery, then that can go through the settlement process and we can get financial revenue through a consistent process. We're also looking at another product within that area, primacy rules for service conflicts. So this is very much about making sure that we've got coordination between national ESO products and local DSO products, making sure that there isn't any conflict, or where there is the potential for conflict, we've got particular data exchanges in place and mechanisms so that we can ensure that a consistent treatment is taken for prioritizing those particular services, and really ensuring that we've treated the market fairly, but also most importantly, keeping the network and the system secure. And that does have a variety of different impacts. So clearly, national security is very important, keeping the lights on a GB level. But there are also particular impacts at a local level that need to be recognised. So there's a framework is being developed at the moment to make sure that both of those things can happen and that they take the relevant priority as well. The fourth area is about reporting of information and sharing, and that's a real crucial point to provide transparency and visibility about our actions. So we've got P7, which is the carbon reporting, and this is joined up in a standard license condition now, requiring DSOs to report on the carbon content of their flexibility services. So we'll be developing, comparing how that is undertaken at the moment, and developing a standardized approach that draws on another of other industry sectors and ensure that we've got consistency of response reporting figures on carbon content for flexibility services. And then we've also got P8, which is the A&M curtailment information, and this is explaining more about how active network management is likely to be impacting flexible connections on the distribution network, and understanding what kind of future impact that might be, particularly with a view for both connections that are under flexibility, under flexible arrangements, making sure that they've got the right level of information, but also supporting further changes in the industry, from firming of connections through the significant code review, or perhaps even some secondary trading arrangements out into the future as well. And then finally, we've got a overarching common framework for flexibility services. So we understand that there's a full range of activities, from constraint identification, forecasting, through to optioneering and assessment, procurement, tendering, dispatch, settlement, a whole range of activities that need to be undertaken in a consistent manner and a simplified manner to make flexibility work. And so through this P0 product, we are keen on doing a horizon scan across all those different activities, making sure that the recommendations that are drawn out of these different products are being adhered to, that there's timely implementation across the different network operators as well, and that we're all learning and sharing the good practice and implementing that good practice within the businesses to provide a consistent base for flexibility markets to operate on. So this overarching common framework will look at all the different activities that are required to drive a deep and rich flexibility market, and then making sure that the work that we do within Open Networks is taken forward at pace, and that any missing gaps or any changes that are identified as part of that process, particularly with respect to driving out some of the outcomes from the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, then this will be captured within the P0 and either the stick to make the DSOs implement as quickly as possible, or the carrot of reaching for further challenge will be understood, placed in the appropriate area of Open Networks, and then driven forward as a program. Good. On the next slide, we have the flexibility services timeline. So we clearly have a very large program, and what we've tried to do is spread out the impact of the delivery of those particular products, so that we've got a number of subject matter experts across the Open Networks program, each tasked with developing these particular products and making sure that we have spread out our customer engagement and stakeholder engagement across the whole of the year. And then we've got timely dissemination and output from some of the product developments that we're making. So lots of detail on this slide, but the short summary is that we've got a number of key specific deliverables that we're working towards, a number of specific touch points that we're seeking to go and get stakeholder feedback on, and this will enable us to really drive the whole of the workstream 1A program to make sure that we deliver those outcomes that we've committed to do on the onset. Good. And then I think the final slide that I've got here is looking at the second half of those particular timelines. There's a couple of points to note, particularly on the Open Networks consultation. So a number of these products we're looking for specific feedback on, and so those will be captured by a kind of wider Open Networks consultation process, and that can help both inform the individual products themselves, but also inform a number of the overarching work streams, and making sure that we've got sufficient scope for sufficiently understood scope so that we've got products to deliver out into the future. We've got a continuing developing timeline across that. Good. On the next slide, I believe it's handing over to some sort of further Q&A. So if there's any sort of questions you've got on flexibility in general or workstream 1A specifically, hopefully you've been tapping them in on the chat, but I'm happy to sort of dive in.
Thanks for covering that overview, Ben. We've got a few questions that have come through. So I think first question is from Jason Brogdon, and it's about our work on baselining. So I think Jason's basically asking how we're going to be building on that work, and also how are we going to be looking at that as part of our work on dispatch and settlement?
Good, good question, Jason. Thanks for that. So I touched on it a little bit about how the baselining work would feed through into the dispatch and settlement operations. So it's key that we provide consistent guidance and tooling so that FSPs can understand exactly how to maximize their performance and ensure that they are delivering the right level of performance to maximize their revenue return. So the dispatch is all about providing consistent data and start and stop signals and sufficient monitoring information between the DSO dispatching that service, requiring that service, and the FSP actually delivering that service. And then once that service is up and running and is being dispatched and post-event, then all that information, the relevant information, needs to come back in and be subject to the baselining, ensuring that we've got a suitable counterfactual position so that we can really understand the delta of the flexibility services that have been dispatched. And then that is taken through into the settlement. The appropriate payment mechanisms are applied. Any over delivery or under delivery is suitably assessed, and that will manifest itself back in either an optimum or maximum revenue back to the FSP, or it will point to some areas of under delivery, which the FSP can then improve their operational processes to try and maximise that chance of revenue capture. So short answer, dispatch about the data, signals, baselining about understanding a counterfactual position and ensuring we've captured the delta correctly, and then settlement is about taking that delta and applying the financial rules. So the consistency that we'll be looking for is about ensuring that the settlement process works on the right data, works alongside the baselining to provide a consistent financial return out of that particular product.
Thanks, Ben. We've got another question here from Mike K, and this one's about GC0117, the code mod that's looking at, I guess, making thresholds for generation more common across GB. So his question is whether or not GC0117 would have any implications for DSO's use of flexibility.
So good question, and thanks for reminding me of GC0117, because I think off the top of my head that might have slipped. But for background, then this is about the different small, medium, and large power station groupings and capacity sizings on there. So certainly the outputs of that will have an impact on the route for which the primary routes for which distribution connected resources will participate in different markets. So if the requirements for large generators, the capacity sizes are a lot lower than what the current bandings are, then that will mop up more distributed connected generation into the sort of balancing mechanism, and more generation will have a primary route into offering flexibility services on a UK-wide level through the ESO. However, so the primary route might change depending on the outcome, but it shouldn't really impact around the DSO's ability to use flexibility to manage constraints. One of the key things that we're working on with the ESO through Open Networks is about making sure that all of flexibility assets that are connected to the distribution network are able to be shared, both in terms of visibility to the DSO, but also investigating how other entities can work together to mutually dispatch through existing contracts. I think that's one of the key outputs of a number of the regional development programs that the DNOs are working on. So yes, it might change the standard de facto route, but it shouldn't really have an impact on the value opportunity for FSPs.
Thanks for that, Ben. I think that concludes all the questions. We did have another question from Paul about how we're looking at trials. I think Andy has addressed that in the chat, but I think just to reiterate what Andy said, we've got a learn by doing approach in Open Networks as part of all of our packages. We do look at industry trials, what learnings are available from them, and factor that into our work. So I guess moving on to the next section then. So we've got a poll here to basically get a view from everyone about, what are some of the areas of interest. And we're asking people to just pick 3, just to give us a sense of where you think, the topics that you think are most important to you and your organizations. So we'll open the poll now and just give it a couple of minutes to get the responses in. We're up to 21 responses. I think people are probably still responding to this, but I think clearly there's a strong interest in our work on flexibility products and also the overarching common framework for flexibility. So I think what we will do is we'll leave this poll open until for the next agenda item until we come to the next question. But I think with that, we'll move on to the next item. So I'll hand over to Chia-Ling, who's our product lead, leading our work on sharing of A&M curtailment information. So over to you, Chia-Ling.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Chia-Ling. I'm the product lead for Product 8 in curtailment information. Just want to spend a few minutes with you this morning to go over what we have been doing in 2021 and our progress and plan for 2022. Just stick with the INA's Open Networks approach. We're trying to work with different stakeholders in a very fair and collaborative way, listen to the stakeholders and work with them, trying to standardize the information and data we provide for curtailment, and try to simplify some of the approach and try to be more transparent in how we share data, what data we share, and how we make decisions. This product has been previously known as Product 9, just to make you confused, in 2021. Next slide, please, Connor. So in 2021, we started by looking at what information and what data DNOs are already sharing at what kind of platform. And we took a two-staged approach to engage with stakeholders, trying to understand what their need, where are the gaps. So we started with a questionnaire, and when we get the response, we had a workshop with the stakeholders, listen to them in more in-depth way, just to see what information do you need, what information is good from which do you know, and where we can learn from each other. And we did a gap analysis report in July. So basically analyzed where the gaps between what the customer and the stakeholders want and where we are today. And we had a second targeted workshop in September last year, trying to show to the stakeholders, this is we think you want, are you happy with this? We basically separated this into different stages for stakeholders to try to apply for a new generation to us. So the first stage is pre-application. The idea is that you can go to the capacity maps, look at different areas, and find out the curtailment information for different technologies to decide if you want to put in a application or not. And then at application and offer stage, we try to see where we're not doing quite well in terms of curtailment information. We're providing you the format of curtailment report and LIFO queues, etc. And finally, when your site is operational, what information do you need to see if NM is doing the right thing, and how often do you will be curtailed, and how does it compare to the predicted figure we give you? Next slide, please. So after we've done the gap analysis in 2021, we published our implementation plan in December. And you can look up this information online rather than me spending a lot of time just reading through them. So the idea is we will take steps to address these gaps from 2022 to the end of ED1. As I say, this is separate into 3 different stages. At pre-application stage, we try to standardize the information we give you on our heat maps. We try to share the generation and battery profiles we use for curtailment studies, and give you a standard and simplified format of what the curtailment estimates are based on technology and location. And also at offer stage, we try to provide a better format in terms of LIFO queue, and we try to standardize our granularity in terms of our curtailment report, and be more transparent on what assumptions we make when we run these studies, and show stakeholders how A&M system work. Once your site is operational, we try to share more data with you, give you an idea of what actions INAM have taken and what your curtailment has been, and also give you power flows on constraint locations to show the INAM is doing the right thing or not. Next slide, please, Connor. Yep. And based on that work plan, we have a few milestones for 2022. So far, we have completed 2 deliverables. The first one is for DNOs to agree on a consistent time frame for updating heat maps. This is just give ourselves a sort of making a commitment that we will be updating heat map informations regularly, because this is one of the very important thing to stakeholders. And also, we are on track in publishing standard profiles for generation and battery energy storage. The next step will be for the DNOs to sit together and come up with a common methodology to provide curtailment estimates. The idea is that if you see on the curtailment, capacity heat maps, 5% at, say, UK Power Networks area will mean pretty much the similar thing in SSE area or WPD area. And also later in the year, we'll try to come up a common approach to share information, to provide a consistent level of granularity in curtailment reports, and come up with a standard way to share information of what actions have been taken by the INAM, and the curtailment will be published in a consistent format as well. So you don't have to change your script or analytical tool when you change from DNO to DNO. Also, we'll be try to come up with a best practice to provide LIFO information that stands for last in, first out, which basically is your position in the INAM queue. And we'll try to standardize as much as possible the curtailment assessment approach that different DNOs are taking, and publish curtailment reports in a agreed manner. That's just a quick overview of where P8 is up to this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yaliang. I don't believe we've got any questions so far in the chat. Maybe we just give it a few seconds just to see if anything's coming through. Nope, doesn't look like it. So I think next up on the agenda, we've got a break for 5 minutes. So we'll return at 11 o'clock. Okay, so I hope everyone's back now. So the next item that we have on the agenda is to talk about our work in the whole electricity system planning space and TD coordination. So I'll hand over to Ian Povey, who is our chair for the work stream, to talk us through that. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Farina. Yeah, I'm Ian Povey of Electricity Northwest, and I'm the coordinator. I'm the chair of the T&D coordination group. We've just heard from Ben about the amount of work going on to facilitate the flexibility marketplace going forward, and the general DSO operation. To make sure this all works properly, there's going to be a focus on coordination between transmission and distribution. But more than just that, there's going to be information put out into the marketplace so that people can make efficient decisions for their particular business. So this product has for a number of years looked at what information we need to share, how we make that consistent across all network companies, and how we improve the data offering as well. So I can point to, historically the work we've done, which has led on to grid code and distribution code modifications, working towards establishing common information model exchange between DNOs and grid, and then further to enhance that so that other non-network company market participants can view that as well in that format. So that's what this work stream is here for. It's to look at some of the technical data that we need to exchange and do that in a way that people can absorb that data in a useful way. Looking at the two key objectives for this coming year would be, as is said on the slide there, it's to optimize the planning data in terms of what do we think the stresses on the network will be in terms of demand, generation, storage, electric vehicle connections. All this is going into the future energy scenarios that National Grid put together, that I'm sure a lot of you out there are familiar with. Maybe less so the distribution future energy scenarios, but what we've been working on is making sure there is a golden thread between those forecasts and scenarios going forward, and building on year on the work that we've been doing together. So I'll go into that in more detail in a wee while. But also we've been looking into our approaches to improve the data offering, the quality of that data, and the consistency across all DNOs and TOs and ESO, so that non-market participants know when they're looking at a data set in one network company and then in another, that they're on a consistent basis, and it will aid the marketplace and aid decision making. You can see on this slide that the 5 products within this work stream are really split into 2 broad areas. There is the network operation and coordination, and there's the investment planning side of things. And you'll notice that some of the products have a red line around them. And I want to draw that to your attention, because we not only just have our own objectives in terms of the 2 that I've already described, but this leads to a 3rd objective in supporting the introduction of new license conditions in a consistent manner across all network companies. So we'll talk about that more when we look at the network development plans and the whole electricity system coordination register. So picking up on the individual products. If we start with product P2, which is about future energy scenarios, what have we done there already is, well, what we've done is we've created an alignment, a golden thread through that links together the FES and the DFES through standardized building blocks. That was done in previous years, and we've building on that year on year and finessing that process. We've established a level of consistency across all DNO DFESs. So you can see in one DNO's offering similarities with another one, with another DNO's offerings. And this product has also delivered what we're terming a best view scenario. So in a normal DFES, as with the FES, there are several different visions of the world going forward, depending on government moves and the way the marketplace. But what there is a real requirement for was a best view that you could use for the network development plan, for long-term development statements, and also for exchange of data between ESO, TOs, and DNOs, and the grid code exchanges, which we term week 24 data exchange. Well, that's work that's already been done, delivered, and we build on that year on year. So what are we going to be doing this year? Well, we're going to continue, as I say, to develop the building blocks that link together the FES and the DFES. And we're going to be engaging with stakeholders so that we can find out their views on the best view scenario, how we put that together, and how we apply that in the network development plan. But we've also delivered in the early part of this year alignment of GSP definitions. It's a rather arcane point, but DNOs have been used to grouping together in sensible manners grid supply points where they are interconnected in what's known as access groups. But that's not the same way as a national grid ESO would communicate with its stakeholders. They tend to use Alexon definitions for GSP groups. So what we wanted to do was establish a common understanding of GSP groups, and that has been delivered this year. So that's P2. That leads us in nicely into P5, the Network Development Plan. In 2019, a new license condition driven by the EU Clean Energy Package has mandated network companies to deliver a network development plan on a biennial basis. This will give stakeholders a view of capacity needs, and where there will be opportunities for flexibilities. I won't go into too much detail because we've got a presentation by my colleague at UKPN, Rita Shaw, on this. So Rita will take you into the detail. But high level, what has this product produced so far? Well, it's produced a standard form of statement which the network companies will use to provide the network development plans, provide a view on that capacity and a view on opportunities for flexibility. That's delivered. So what will we be doing this year? Well, the network companies will be publishing, in line with that standard form of statement, the network development plans on the 1st of May. This product will then be looking to engage with stakeholders to understand their views and where improvements can be made, and get general feedback on the network development plans as published. We're looking to ensure that we've got alignment with the outcome of the long-term development statement review that Ofgem are running, and based on stakeholder feedback and anything that comes out of the long-term development statement, we'll be recommending at the end of the year improvements and also governance arrangements around the network development plan. As I say, I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll let Rita pick that up when she comes to talk about P5 in detail. Moving on swiftly to the distributed energy resource visibility and monitoring product. That's product 6. This product has its origins in the 9th of August 2019 power failure and the subsequent Ofgem call for evidence to help establish a clear policy on DER monitoring requirements. So what has the product done thus far? Well, it's identified data sets that could be exchanged, and it's then looked at the implications of trying to source those data sets. It's completed justifications on those data sets and then come up with recommendations about which data sets we should look to implement and exchange almost immediately. We've provided that information to Ofgem. We've had a workshop with Ofgem to go through the detail of the work, and Ofgem now will be considering that work and looking to make a policy statement on that. But we await that. What will the project be doing this year? Well, it will be investigating some of the data sets that we didn't take forward in last year, but to see if there are ways that we can justify the expenditure in collecting that data and whether it's really worth doing that. So that will continue this year. Along with product P7, we'll be looking at or reviewing and recommending mechanisms for sharing the data, not just sharing it between T&D, but sharing it with other market participants in the most efficient way. So that's the piece of work that they've got ahead of them this year. And we're going to ensure, they're going to do a piece of work to ensure alignment across DSOs of all the data sets and make these available to other market participants. I think it's fair to say we are also reviewing whether there is further work we can do in this product to look at what data we can look to collect at the moment that we don't collect presently. So at the moment we've looked at what data is available and what makes sense to share. We're now looking at what would be involved in saying we want to collect more data and what the costs of that, not just for ourselves, but for the external parties who wish to connect to our networks. That's P6. As I say, there's a bit of a link across to P7, which is looking at operational data sharing. We're looking at what data we can share, how we can share that, and it's a focus on real-time data sets. What is it? What has this product completed? Well, last year it undertook a RAG analysis to identify data sets that could easily be shared with industry participants, and that has since, well, the green data sets as identified in the RAG analysis have now been shared by DNOs through their websites. It's fair to say that they've been shared in different manners across all network companies. So as we go forward next year, we'll be looking to get some standardization in the way that that information is presented. And as I said before, that will be a piece of work that will be done in conjunction with P6. We'll furthermore this year, we'll be looking at the AMBER data sets from the RAG analysis and see whether we can look to publish some of those, whether it makes sense, whether that is useful for market participants, and whether it's washing its face with the CBA. It's worth mentioning that the output from this group was shared by Ofgem in their 2nd of March open letter on operational data sharing commitments. So if you want to see a wee bit more of the data of the outputs, you can go to that letter, which is on the Ofgem website. finally, we come to P9, which is Whole Electricity System Coordination Registers. In 2021, a license condition, which is D17 for DNOs and A7 for the transmission companies, is required a publication of a coordination register. The aim of this register is to demonstrate how companies are dispatching their duty to develop holistically an efficient and economical network. So what has this product delivered? So far, it's delivered a form of statement for all network companies to provide this information in the form of a register. So when you look at National Grid or my own company EW, you'll see the same register with the relative information in there. So that's been developed. We will be publishing that register this year in May 2022. And again, we'll be looking to receive feedback on this and then act on that feedback with recommended improvements to that form of statement. So, Connor, if you can move on to my next slide, please. So you can see from this, if you look at P2, we are continuing on a timeline that helps us deliver the FES in the normal way by the end of June. And DNOs will be delivering their DFESs. I think everybody gets theirs complete by the end of November. And you can see the work that goes there into making sure we meet that timeline. You'll note there's a stakeholder engagement in June, and we've aligned that with the stakeholder engagement that we need to do in product P5 particularly, but also P9. But I mentioned particularly P5 because there is this link between producing the best view scenario and how that feeds into the network development plan. And we want to test what we've done with stakeholders, receive feedback, and then look as we go through the latter end of the year to make improvements based on that feedback. P9 stakeholder engagement sits pretty much on its own, really, but we didn't want to have multiple stakeholder engagements, so it felt sensible to bring those all together at one session. That's something for everyone to look forward to there. P5, sorry, P6. You can see that there will be. We've already delivered the CBA and had the regulator workshop, as I mentioned before. There'll be the gap analysis going forward, and then look to improve the data offering, but also the mechanisms along with the timeline shown there. And that's similar for P7. So I think that really brings to a close what I've got to say on T&D. I think the next part is opening up the floor to any questions that anybody may have. Because I've been talking, I don't know if anything's come in the chat, Farina.
No, we've not got any questions in the chat. I think we'd also encourage people to perhaps maybe raise their hand if you'd like to just come in with your question. I think meanwhile, whilst we wait for that, it might be helpful, Connor, if you can go to the next slide and open the poll. So in terms of the next poll, I think if you just bring that back up, so I think what we're really, so we've got all of the different products that Ian's just talked us through, and I think we're asking you to, I guess, rank them in terms of the order of interest to you. So this will really help us understand, what are some of the areas you're more interested in, and it will help us, shape future sessions and future products that we bring to this particular forum. I can see we've got a hand up from Mark. Mark, did you want to come off mute and share your question?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Ian. Mark from the REA. A very quick
Mark.
question. Obviously, you've got these stakeholder engagement sessions happening in June, July, and you're currently in the process, as you described, of capturing key learnings from each DNOs. How much output can we expect in advance of the stakeholder engagement sessions for which we can engage in and read up so that we can comment properly within those stakeholder engagement pieces? And when can we expect to see that published?
Right. Clearly, the output of the network development plan will be published by the date required in our license condition. So that will be, I think that's 1st of May. The network development plan will be published, and I'm not quite sure of the date, to be honest with you, for the coordination register. The FES will be published along its normal timescales. We will be publishing reports, and I've also already done so through Open Networks on the various products. Difficult for me to remember at this stage what the individual product delivery dates are, but I can certainly get back to you with the dates of the various reports that will be coming out from those products.
That's fine. No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
I think in the next presentation as well, we've got some key dates for the NDPs, and we've got some links as well where people can find the latest plans. Okay, so are there any other questions at this point? We've got 14 responses on the poll so far, so I think similar to the previous poll, we'll leave this open for people to respond to, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. So as Ian said, we'll be talking about network development plans in a bit more detail, and we've got Dr. Rita Shaw, who is our product lead on it. So over to you, Rita.
Thank you very much, Farina, Ian. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. Right, so I'll be talking about the network development plan product, and Ian has already given a little bit of introduction to that. If we go on to the next slide, please. So to kick off, so this is a new regulatory requirement which applies to all the distribution networks, which we need to publish by the 1st of May 2022. But actually this is a great week to be talking about this, because all the DNOs have this week published their draft network development plans for consultation, and the final slide of my presentation will give links to all of those, and I'm sure that we'll be able to circulate that after the meeting if it hasn't already. So the 1st of May is the final date, but it's we've already put that information out in the public domain. So this will be giving a medium-term view of each DNO's best view plan for network development. It uses the baseline of 2021 from the network and demand and generation conditions in last year's long-term development statement. That's another one of our regulatory license conditions, and the network development plan is very much designed to build on it. So the LTDS gives extensive information about the networks as they are now and looks forward 5 years, whereas the network development plans are looking forward 10 years for infrastructure and flexibility services plans, and looking even further out, looking at to 2050 at the context of unused substation capacity in the distribution future energy scenarios. And I'll give a bit more context in a moment about what they are. So the purpose of this is that through the network development plans, each DNO is going to be able to give some more information about what's happening in each network area, where and why with stakeholders, and answering 2 key questions about what development is occurring from an infrastructure perspective, and also what flexibility services will be procured. And crucially, that's going further ahead than just what's the next tender round, for example, but putting it in that slightly more long-term context. And it's doing that in the context of unused substation capacity. And probably one of the key things to flag is that capacity may be unused in a specific year, but it may still be committed to certain customers through connections applications. So the network development plans can give some really rich information to stakeholders on the questions that we've set out above, but they should be, we advise that people proceed with caution if they're asking slightly different questions about how much network capacity is available right now in a specific area which isn't committed to specific customers. In those sort of cases, we'd be suggesting that stakeholders are still approaching the connections teams of their respective distribution network company, using some of the heat map tools on those companies' websites, for example. So that would be very much complementary to the rich information that we have in the network development plans. If we move on to the next slide, but I give you a bit of a flavour about what has been produced. So through the Open Networks project, last year the product team engaged and was worked together to develop what we called a form of statement with the detail of how to deliver on the license requirement that we were given by Ofgem. And crucially, and in kind of response to stakeholder feedback, this means that we're delivering a common approach for every distribution network operator's network development plan. So it means that we went from the license condition, which is fairly high level in 2020. In November 2020, the DNOs then set out specifically a form of statement for those unused capacity or headroom reports or standardized network capacity reports. We went through a few names to try and explain that better. And at the end of August last year, all of the DNOs published a first version of those headroom report tables and sought stakeholder feedback and used that to develop their capabilities and processes. And then that led forward into being able to define the full form of statement. So at the end of last year, the full form of statement for the network development plan was published, and that's a public document on the Open Networks website. And that has been what we've used to set those NDPs for publication this year. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk through what that form of statement includes at high level. So there's 3 standalone reports within the network, these new network development plans. There are the network development reports. Those are going to be updated at least every 2 years. They introduce the purpose of the network development plan. They set out those high level plans for infrastructure and flexibility services and justification for those, and they are covering for the next 10 years from the highest distribution voltage, that may be 132 kV, or it may be a lower voltage on some of the Scottish distribution networks, down to primary substations. The second part is the network headroom report. Those are going to be updated annually. We understood that although our license requirement only sets a minimum of updating every 2 years, all of the DNOs are updating their load scenarios, reviewing their capacity every year. So we have decided, and I think this is supported by stakeholder feedback, that this is something that we are going to update every year beyond our minimum requirement. And that's going to set out for all of our grid, otherwise known as bulk supply point, and primary substations. So for all the substations that are in the long-term development statement, we are setting out demand headroom and generation headroom over time to 2050 in our 4 distribution future energy scenarios. Ian mentioned a little bit earlier on about the future energy scenarios and the distribution future energy scenarios. So the future energy scenarios, that's the national grid GB version. Each DNO is also producing its regionally specific version, taking into account more local data or local inputs, but we are all working on the same common approach of 4 scenario worlds: steady progression, consumer transformation, system transformation, and leading the way. Some DNOs are also developing additional scenarios to guide their planning, but at a minimum, each of the DNOs is going to be producing these headroom tables for all the substations in the LTDS out to 2050. The third component of the network development plan is the methodology. That will be updated as required, so it's likely to be every 2 years, but it may not necessarily be a wholesale update every 2 years, and that's explaining our approach to identifying the best view plan of interventions on the network. It'll explain the calculation of the network headrooms, and it explains that end-to-end process from forecasting to network impacts to assumptions to justify what developments we are expecting to take through forward into infrastructure and flexibility services interventions. And as we look further out in the future compared to the long-term development statement, there will be uncertainty in what customer needs are and what the load and generation at each of these substations is going to be. So the methodology will give a flavour of how distribution network operators are working with that uncertainty, how they are using the multiple scenarios to influence this. Can I go to the next slide? So some excerpt here from that form of statement. So the network headroom report for all the DNOs has these types of headings. It's giving the name of the substation, its voltage, the bulk supply point it's on, the grid supply point, information about its location, and the demand headroom and the generation headroom for the substation. That's being produced per scenario and per year. It's being done every year to 2030 and then every 5 years after that. And we've also taken forward consistency in the network development report. So in all of the reports, you should see this sort of information describing proposals for flexibility services and for infrastructure. And it will also be giving some information about where that project is in the delivery life cycle. So, for example, is that something that we're signposting and expecting? Is it something that we have approved funding for? Is it something that's approved but not yet in delivery, particularly as you're getting further out? So these different categories are relevant for different types of projects, or it may be something that's already in delivery and we've already started working on, whether that's infrastructure or flex. Next slide, please. So as an example, the headings that we mentioned earlier, those are common to all DNOs, but different DNOs may then try and find ways to present some of this information in the best way. So they'll all have the tables as a minimum, but I know that many of us are trying to also find more intuitive visual ways of showing this in graphs combined with other data sets potentially on our websites, again linking them back to the work that we're publishing in each DNO and the distribution future energy scenarios. So you'll be able to find all of this. If we go to the next slide, we've got a list of all of the consultations that are out now that have that sort of information that I've just covered available on the websites with a link to the respective companies involved, so you can work out what's relevant for either your network area or the area that you're working in. So we'd be within each of those, there'll be information about how you can respond to the consultations, any queries, and then final versions will be published by the 1st of May, which happens to be a Sunday. So most of the DNOs will be doing it a few days earlier. I'd like to go to questions now. I think there's a few in the chats. Farine, do you want to guide me to which ones to go to, or shall I pick them off?
Yep, sure. Now happy to talk through the questions. So we've got 2 questions. So the first one from Mike K about whether or not the NDP, so does the NDP include the 11 kV network or just the 11 kV primary bars?
11 kV down to the primary bars. The scope of including it down to the 11 kV network was something considered in the former statement, and I think it's potentially an option for the future, but not at this stage.
Thanks, Rita. And we've got another question from Mark about whether or not there'd be some form of summary document that's produced to kind of, summarize what the different NDP reports have in them, just for easier comparison.
That's summaries of all of the NDPs, do we? Is that question?
Maybe if I could come in.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
I mean, basically this comes from, so obviously last year or earlier this year even, we saw the business plans from all the DNOs and all which they produced. Obviously, they were quite rightly all produced in their own style and in with their own interests. But for that, it would have been incredibly helpful if there had just been some attempt made to have a standard summarized document which the DNOs can fill out themselves based on the document they've just produced, but with standardized headings to say, look, this is what we're doing in regards to this issue or this topic. And equally with this, that would be an incredibly useful thing to have again. So a kind of framework document that says, you've produced your own report, you've done your own thing on NDP, but what are your answers to these specific issues, so that easy comparison can be made across them while looking at a 1 or 2 page document kind of piece, because otherwise you're expecting the sector to read in 28 days 6 different documents, which is demanding.
Apologies, I put myself on mute while I was listening. Yeah, and we appreciate the NDPs do actually include a lot of information down to individual substations. Would it be okay if I followed up with you afterwards on how that might work? Because it's not something that we're trying to do at the moment. Where we've gone for standardization was, yeah, around the kind of the headings and scope, but
Sure.
not in terms of summary. So yeah, if I can, I'll try and get your details through the organisers afterwards, if that's okay.
I'd be very happy to.
Thank you.
Okay. We've got another question from Mike about whether we can also include the links to the actual consultations. So thank you, Connor, for responding to that. So we'll include the links to the consultations as well, if that's helpful. Yeah. And then finally, we've just got another question coming through from Martin. Will the NDP include all secondary substations?
No, the scope of the network headroom report and the network development report does not include secondary substations. That's a kind of an order of magnitude addition, I think, in terms of detail. At the moment, for the primary substations and above, it's including all of that information individually. I think that there could potentially be an argument for providing summary information at the secondary substation level, but I think that's an area that we'd be interested in stakeholder feedback and balancing what's really useful to stakeholders and what can be readily delivered. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you for that. We're just slightly over, but the next item we've got on the agenda is an overview of our work within the Customer Information Provision and Connections workstream. So Jim is our chair for the Connections workstream. So over to you, Jim.
Yeah, hi Farina. Morning, just about everybody. I work for Northern Power Grid. I'm our lead on the Open Networks program, but in my capacity today, I'm speaking to you as the chair of our workstream 2, which is, as the title suggests, they're looking at information and customer connections. So I guess the themes very much, and I'm going to give a brief introduction, open up, see if there's any questions, and then I'm going to hand over to Steve and Bahij, who are going to talk through the embedded capacity register, which you see on this slide, because I think it's a really interesting development, and we thought we'd share that with you to get your views on that. So there's a bit of a deeper dive on that one, I suppose. But in the kind of the 2 main areas, if you look at the graphic here in terms of what we're doing, there's very much in the operation of the processes at our connection front ends as distribution transmission businesses, very much a focus this year on implementation and codification, and I guess continual improvement, that kind of theme that's come up from a number of the speakers already, where our approach is really to try and get going as soon as we can and then improve as we go, if you like. So of the 2 examples that we've put on there, we've got queue management, which is all about after a connection has been accepted and we've got a capacity constraint in an area of the network, how that connection queue has been the operation of those queues and how that's being standardized. So we've got standardized processes that were developed through the course of previous work in the work stream, and we're now into both implementing, learning from that, and also codification, as I said, in terms of how we get that going. So this is really about efficient and fair use of the capacity that's available to make sure we get as much low carbon technology connected as we can onto the system. And the second item, I'll come back to these when I come onto the timeline in a minute, but the second one is about application and interactivity. So that's an earlier stage in the connections process. So this is about where there's a number of connectees interested in connecting to an area of network where ultimately there's a current constraint on that, and understanding in terms of capacity and understanding how some of those quotations that are going out are interactive, if you like. And that of course could be going out from the transmission system or the distribution system. And it's really then looking about how those systems work. And again, we've developed sort of common processes, and some of that's in development and some of that's going through codification this year, and we're going to learn from that and make amendments or refine or add extra bits to it. But it's very much a case of now in implementation for some of the processes we did. And then we've got the embedded capacity register, which I'm not going to say a lot more about at this stage, other than to say it's really this is really a great case of where digitalization is coming in to our work, and we're looking to upscale the established registers that already exist, but albeit in fairly old school spreadsheet kind of format on our individual DNO websites, identifying where the distributed energy resources are connected to our systems, down to a megawatt, 1 megawatt in size. And this is about then saying, let's go lower in the system, let's go down to 50 kilowatts, which obviously brings with it a fair degree of scale, but also brings with it a need to digitalize that, because if we're getting down to lower values, then we need to be looking at machine-to-machine interfaces to make that information available, both on what we've got available, what are the flexibility contracts that we've got in place, or what are some of the reinforcements that are needed at those parts of the system. So Connor, if we can spin it on, please, that'd be great. And so here you see our products, and I'll come on to the bottom one, because I haven't mentioned that one yet, but I think it's a nice sort of summary of it. But in the blue swathe that you see at the top there, this is about the embedded capacity register. And I guess there's two rows to that, really. One is the work that Stephen Bahiji are going to talk about when we finish this slot, and we'll get into some of the detail there, so I won't say any more about that. And the second one, I guess, is about while we're developing some of that machine-to-machine kind of capability in making that information available, we're also pushing on with curating our data, getting our data accessible, and starting to increase the scope of the traditional format, if you like, of those registers to enable us then to port it across and get it into that more sophisticated, more complex solution that we're implementing at the moment, designing and implementing. So that's the blue one. You see there in the orange the queue management. We start to get some wonderful code kind of references here. So there's that big orange band there which talks about the custom modification CMP 376, and this is really about in the transmission world, the ESO looking to create through a custom modification the right to terminate contracts with people with connections whose projects are not progressing in line with the milestones that have been set out. So that's about giving the ESO the rights to do those things at the transmission level. So that's going on through the course of this year as that codification work goes on. And then we've got other bits going on in queue management, which is really about, I guess, the tracking and continual management, continual improvement I talked about. So it's defining a monitoring approach to give transparency for what's actually going on with these milestones down at the distribution level, and how is this working out, how at an anonymized level, clearly, but just what's actually happening as a result of these connections milestones. Are people hitting their milestones? Are they not? When they're not hitting them, are they outside of their tolerance bands? What's that meaning in terms of are people having to leave that connections queue? So just try to give that visibility, and that was an idea that came out through a predecessor to this forum, actually, probably the last time we were speaking about these things. So we're looking forward to sort of bringing that some of that forward this year. We've also got this issue about saying, well, what can we do if we've got a flexible resource that we think we can promote in the queue? How can that work? So we're looking to learn from what goes on in our various implementations of this through this year. Interactivity, another couple of code mods there going on. So the two that you see there, the CUSC CMP 328 and the DCUSA DCP 392 are all about implications of transmission works affecting distribution networks. So I'm not going to the details of them now, but it's kind of that way round. So it's really about looking at this interconnected system, this whole system view, and looking at how that impact is being recognised at both those levels. So again, this is about saying, well, let's see what those processes and indeed Ofgem's SCR decision, see if there's any implications, and then we'll tweak and adjust and refine as necessary our application interactivity processes. So that's there. And the one I just sort of come to at the end, the green one at the bottom, this is this overarching code review. I guess this is our way of tracking, I suppose, some of the code modifications I've talked about and some of the others that are out there, and making sure that we're working out how the implementation is going ahead and how the codes are going to support some of the priorities we've set here to try and make efficient use of grid capacity and indeed getting data out there to help people with accessing the system. So Farina, I'll stop at that point. Quick blast through. Any questions?
Thank you, Jim. I don't think we've got any questions through the chat, but you know, as with previous sessions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat or raise your hand. I think whilst we wait for that, Connor, if you can just go to the next poll as well. I think similar to the previous topic, we've got a similar question for the different products that Jim has just talked to us about. So we're asking everyone to rank them in the order of interest to you and your organization. So if you can respond to that, I think that would be helpful. I don't believe there are any hands raised, but if people would like to ask any questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop that in the chat for us. Mark?
Hi, Jim. Yeah, thank you very much. On the queue management piece, obviously you're monitoring progress of the CUSC modifications, a lot of which related to thresholds brought in last year. I'm wondering if you have any plans to publish outcomes of that review process to understand, you know, the real impact that those thresholds have had, you know, the number of times you are providing leniency against them, or number of times you are removing people from the queue, obviously at a nominalized basis. But yeah, just, you know, is there any plans to produce data that we can see to see how those CUSC modifications have had an impact?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yes is the simple answer. So I talked about defining a monitoring approach. So we've got a bit of a draft of that at the moment. We haven't finalised that yet, but that's very much an anonymised data, you know, very data rational set of numbers, like the sort of thing like, you know, number of connection offers that have been issued with these milestones in, the number that are proceeding within the tolerant with the milestones, the number that are proceeding, you know, within the tolerances. Then they might be outside of where they initially said, but they're still proceeding, and indeed the numbers where we're having to remove people from the connections queue because of non-compliance with some of those milestones. So, I mean, I guess that's exactly the plan, and that's the idea, is to give transparency of actually what has been the impact and what are the benefits, if you like, of this approach for getting more people connected by capacity not just being stalled, if you like, on the system, and it being made available to other connectees to actually get connected. So that's exactly the point that we're trying to get to, which is to give it that transparency and to give it some numbers on a consistent basis across all the networks. Back to you, one of your previous questions, which is help me out here. Don't make me go around 6 websites. Yeah, just give it one table and say, there you go. There, you've got it all.
Excellent. No, that's really welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for answering that, Jim. And yeah, I guess just to add to that, we're planning to publish that towards the end of the year, so definitely want to keep an eye out for. I don't think we've got any other questions, so I think we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the embedded capacity register. So Steve and Bahish will give us an update on what we've been doing in that space. So over to both of you.
Hi. Yeah, good morning. Yes, it definitely is morning. Yeah, I'm Steve Halsey, co-lead and from UK Power Networks. I've had the pleasure of working on the Open Networks project for about 4 or 5 years now. Previously delivered a number of products and now working on the embedded capacity register in the old-fashioned form that Jim mentioned, the spreadsheet form, which is no longer going to be sustainable as we look to lower that threshold. But Heath, did you want to quickly introduce yourself? Can't hear you, Bahish.
Apologies for this. Can you hear me now?
Okay, just about.
Hello. Can you hear me now? Are you able to hear me now?
Ah, that's it. Yeah.
Sorry about this. Yeah, technology, when you want it to work, lets you down. Apologies for this. So my name is Bahija Youssef, co-lead on the ECR product, and I currently work for Western Power Distribution.
Right, thank you. Next slide then, please, Connor. So I'll just do a couple of slides to sort of set the scene in terms of what the ECR is, if you're not aware of that. So the Embedded Capacity Register is a monthly publication by all DNOs and IDNOs. And as Jim mentioned and I mentioned just now, it is in a spreadsheet-based format, and each DNO publishes their own version of that on the 10th working day of the month. And the ECR comprises a list of all projects, all generation projects that are either already accepted, already connected to the network, or are accepted to connect. And that current threshold level is 1 megawatt. And we've been publishing that for just over a year or so now. In terms of the total number of volumes across all 6 DNOs, and I'm going to focus on DNOs rather than IDNOs at the moment, but in terms of DNOs, the number of entries across all of those is around about 5,500. When we look to lower that threshold to the 50 kilowatt level, we see the potential number of entries rise to in excess of 16,000. So very much supporting the views that have just been shared, that it's not going to work in a spreadsheet format. It's not going to be sustainable. And in terms of sort of the level of involvement for DNOs, that's quite an ask to populate a spreadsheet with the large number of cells that are being required. And I'll explain that a little bit more. In terms of the details that are published, as you can see there, it ranges from customer name, MPAN, the address of the site, the location, geographic location in terms of X and Y coordinates, where and how it's connected. So that connectivity relates to sort of the connectivity model. So if it's connected to an 11 kV substation, what is the next level upstream, and what's the next level upstream from that, all the way up to the grid supply point interface with National Grid. Energy source, as you can imagine, and the rating of that energy source. And as I said, it does that for all connected and accepted to connect projects. For accepted to connect, it's not always possible to publish all of that information, because at the time a project is immediately accepted, some of that information is not known and certainly isn't available. And I said it's published on a monthly basis. And where applicable, we also publish information on flexibility. Which of those sites of 1 megawatt are currently providing flexibility services, and as a second or the third tab, information on reinforcement that's being carried out or is being planned to be carried out by DNOs to support the delivery of those LCT connections that we spoke about. So next slide, please, Connor. So we've got an example here. Clearly, you cannot read much, if any, of what's on there. But this is just an example, a snapshot from one of those publications. The actual spreadsheet runs to 57 columns wide, I think, 57 columns wide. You can only see a number there, and in various levels of completion. So some of the data on the left-hand side is less complete than other data, and certainly as you go across to the right-hand side, when we start talking about technology, there is the capability to increase or sort of include technology up to 3 different levels. So there's a number of repeated columns once you talk about technology type 1, technology type 2, and technology type 3. We're currently limited to up to 3 technologies. We felt that was a sensible level, and certainly when we first introduced this and it was known as the system-wide resource register, it was probably fair to say it only came with the ability to enter a single technology. We've now expanded that to 3 technology types as we're starting to see more and more sites and more requests to us to connect a variety of technologies at a single site. So when we go down to 50 kilowatts, there will be an additional level of challenge, and many of the DNOs are starting to see entries in on there what would contain personal data, so data that some of those sites are owned by individuals rather than companies, and clearly we would need to redact some of the information where it relates to names, and certainly not allow anybody to from any combination of data that might be published to identify who the individuals are there. So when we move down to 50 kilowatts, you'll start to see a number of cells that a number of entries that are redacted. I think that's probably all I want to say on that. Move on, please. So in terms of the next steps, again, we've already covered this and already mentioned it. We're looking to lower that threshold down to 50 kilowatts. Quite an ask. As I've already mentioned, we're starting to sort of get a view on what those numbers look like, and that's a 3-4-fold increase in data, from 5,500 to certainly in excess of 16,000. And as again I've mentioned, that does present DNOs with population challenges. Many of the entries don't necessarily have the connectivity data automatically recorded within the DNOs. Some of it is kept at sort of district level or area level rather than at the level that we would like it, and certainly that's available with some of those larger connections that are above the 1 megawatts. In order to formalize the move to a lower threshold, we're having to raise a Jacuzza mod, that is DCP 399 if you're interested in looking at that, and we expect to implement between April and July. And why between April and July? Largely because the Jacuzza mod isn't going to be or isn't likely to be completed until June/July, and therefore that we would publish first in the July publication, the 10th working day in July. DNOs had previously committed to publish in March, which would clearly see us doing that ahead of the Jacuzza mod. We can actually do that, and we're looking to publish in April. It's probably fair to say that yes, it won't be 100% complete in terms of data that is usable. Some cells will of course say data not available or data not yet available, and we will look to increase the population of those cells as time goes on, and certainly look to get to a much better position by the July publication. I think that's probably all I need to say on that. And then and clearly the number of entries there, the 6 spreadsheets, the 6 DNO versions is not overly fantastic, and in line with many of the other presentations, certainly Ben and Rita, in terms of data sharing, bringing that to life, doing that in a spreadsheet format isn't really fit for purpose. So we will be looking to digitalize that. In fact, a couple of DNOs have already sort of taken the first steps towards that. And I shan't steal Bahiji's thunder, but clearly it's about making all of the data easily accessible to everybody that might have an interest in any of those embedded resources. So at that, I'll hand over to Yusuf. Hopefully technology sorted and we're ready to go.
Thank you very much, Steve. If we can go to the next slide, please. So as Steve mentioned earlier, so the key ambition of the digitalization of the ECR is to make sure that the data contained within the ECR can be accessible and used by all users with a vested interest, no matter what of the level of technology they've got available, or the tech savvy skills, etc. It's just making sure anyone can access it. So the ECR, again, as Steve mentioned, is a very information-rich report that is currently spread across a number of tables and bundled into a single Excel workbook. This solution, although it has worked in the past and it's still working for now to some extent, it is not exactly a sustainable way of distributing this information to our users, which has created the need to digitalize the report. And the overarching principle of the strategy that we are working on is to ensure that ECR is available for consumption in whichever way best suits a given user. This can be via an API, so an application programming interface, using geospatial visualization, or just providing the data set in a tabular format. So earlier on this year, we have worked through a number of digitalization solutions and kind of considered the advantages, disadvantages of each one. A clear winner was the decentralized approach, whereby each DNO will host their own digitalized version of the ECR, which is, from our point of view, is the most sustained way to digitalize this information. I have included a link to the recommendation paper that kind of made the conclusion about why this option is probably the best. So whomever, if you've got access to these slides, you would be able to kind of look at this this paper, this report, and hopefully this will provide more information as to how we got to that conclusion. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in terms of digitalization, we kind of see it as there are a number of prerequisites that will kind of be the foundation for digitalizing the ECR, and these are broken down into a number of components. So the first one is the application programming interface, what we will refer to as the API going forward. So in very quickly, in the grand scheme of things, an API will just allow a given user to consume ECR data using scripts, and in whichever kind of programming language they decide to use. So this component is very much vital to digitalizing the ECR. As it stands right now, in the format that it is published, so the ECR has to be manually downloaded and then ingested, or it has to be scraped from DNO's websites. Now, although this solution kind of works, it has got a flaw in it, whereby as soon as the link to the given ECR changes, the people writing these scripts that will do the scraping would have to kind of adjust their programs, etc. Which, again, as a stopgap, it works, but it's not sustainable. And in order to avoid this sort of challenge, what would be very useful is to have dedicated API endpoints. Think of them as just a URL which are like the examples on this slide, where you know, a given user that chooses to consume the ECR data in that manner will know that if, you know, whenever they kind of set their scripts to go and fetch the data, it will kind of this operation will happen via this same URL every single time. So it kind of lowers the need to kind of maintain any script, etc. And so the format with which this data will be distributed, there are two formats. One is JSON format, and the other one is CSV. And as I said, here's a couple of examples showing what the endpoints could look like. Can we go to the next slide, please? The second component is very much the visualization component. So as we all know, you know, raw data has always got a story to tell, as long as it is combined with the correct delivery medium. So in this case, the ECR includes geospatial information in the form of X and Y coordinates. These can be used to kind of superimpose the every resource on a map of the UK. In some instances, a lot of users prefer this visual aspect, so they would like to go to, you know, a specific region, zoom in on that, and kind of consume the information in that manner. And this is kind of the point that we are trying to make with this component specifically. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the third and final component of the digitalization strategy is to allow for you know, this information to still be available in tabular format, either to kind of browse readily on each DNO's website, or to have it downloaded as well, and, you know, analyzed in any third-party package that is capable of interpreting a CSV file. Obviously, this is an obvious choice to have there as well. You know, a lot of users still prefer to consume the data in that manner, and also like to enrich the data set by combining it with other third-party data sets, and it is vital to make this option available. Now, for the rest of these slides, so if we can go to the next one, I have just included a few screenshots, because usually, you know, the picture is just an easier way of showing you an example. And like Steve said, a few of the DNOs have kind of already taken a number of steps towards digitalizing the ECR. So if, in this instance here, this is a screenshot from UK Power Networks, and this shows, you know, the visual aspect of the ECR. From a zoomed out point of view, it will show, you know, the number and the size and shade of the bubble will show the density of the resources. So if we go to the next slide, please. If you zoom in on a given region and click on a pinpoint, the information that is within the ECR will be made available as well. So this is very, very helpful visual information. If we go to the next slide, please. So this is a screenshot from WPD's connected data portal. This is the the tabular format that I was referring to, and you will notice that there are a couple of buttons as well available. So whether to download this data set as it is, or to access it via a data API. So in the next slide, please. There's an example of what the API endpoint will look like, and there will be a number of filtering options available. So a user doesn't necessarily have to kind of fetch the entirety of the ECR. If they don't have to, they can filter it either, you know, by substation or by the limit, you know, if they want the first 5 rows, for instance. And all of this would be provided within an API documentation page, which is separate to that, as well as a data dictionary. And I believe, right, so this is just the last slide. I've kind of included the kind of the conclusion of why the decentralized approach was chosen to be the best. And it's clearly like this approach will easily cope with the volume of ECR data that is coming up by lowering the inclusion threshold. There's low overhead cost to each DNO. The data is already owned by the DNO, so it's just a little bit of development to kind of implement each component. There's a low risk of data duplication and discrepancy, and obviously the DNO remains the custodian of the data that they are putting out for sharing. And this is why we kind of agreed that the decentralized solution is the best approach for the strategy. And I believe this is the end of the slides, just on time, so happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stephen, Vahij. We're running slightly over time, but we've got quite a few questions, and I think all really good questions, so it'll just be worth running through them. So
absolutely.
So we've got a couple of questions here really about, with regards to the quality of information and I guess consistency with which the networks are populating it. And I think some of the examples that have been quoted are, for example, like DNOs. So some DNOs include envisaged connection dates, others don't. Some DNOs include secondary technologies, others are only using one technology. And I believe Helen's Stack from Centrica has also made a point around data on transmission and distribution reinforcements, and that not, I guess, being available for all of the DNOs. Did you want to maybe perhaps shed any light on that?
Sure. Steve, did you want to take?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the spreadsheet, it's a common spreadsheet that all DNOs are trying to complete as accurately as possible. Even at the 1 megawatt level, DNOs did struggle to access all of the information that they needed to populate each of those. And in some instances, it's probably fair to say some DNOs did struggle initially to make the link between maybe what was an initial technology on a site, let's say a wind farm, and then a subsequent addition of storage maybe 2, 3, 4 years later. Typically, it might well have been known as a different name, and it was difficult for the DNO to identify that. Hopefully, over time, most of those have been ironed out, and we now see that the co-located energy sources on a single site being recorded as such. It's probably fair to say it's equally there weren't a massive amount of co-located sites initially. But that has changed significantly in the applications that DNOs have received probably in the last year and a half, where it's probably fair to say probably 50% of applications that have been received are for the co-location of energy sources. So I think that answers the first bit. Farina, remind me on the second bit, please.
I think the second bit was around sharing information for transmission and distribution reinforcements, and whether we've got plans to, I guess, make that consistent across different companies and make them, I guess, make sure they're publishing that. Yeah,
again, we have there are different approaches to that, and partly those different approaches are driven by the way in which a connection is being afforded. So, for example, speaking about many of the UKPN connections, many of those are requiring sole use assets to afford the connection rather than shared use assets. And if it's sole use, then it doesn't go down. It's not recorded as reinforcement. I do recognise that with the UKPN one, we probably need to look and review how we actually publish some of that information, but I think that's probably the same across some of the other DNOs as well. As we're starting to see some of the stuff that Ian mentioned earlier, the transmission and distribution interfaces and the information that Rita mentioned, also we're starting to publish, I'd say, similar information, but information that could certainly be used across many of those data portals, and we'll be looking to try to make sure that we do that in a consistent format across all of those, and certainly not, and try not to duplicate it unnecessarily. Does that answer that?
I think as Jim said earlier as well, it is about continuous improvement and I guess identifying these gaps and, and trying to close them through the year.
Yep.
We've got a few questions from Mike. So I guess the next question is really about GDPR. So if we are going down to 50 kilowatts, does that mean we may need a license change to avoid any GDPR issues? Perhaps maybe Bahij or Steve, between you, want to answer that?
So it's probably fair to say that we covered that off previously, and the Jacuza, the previous Jacuza change that we made. Yeah, 350. Thank you. Allowed us to publish that and requires us to publish that and covers off the requirement under the Utilities Act Section 105. I think if somebody's just put in there, but clearly GDPR on its own, it doesn't allow us to publish any data about Mr. and Mrs. Miggins, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Miggins. So, and we're certain, it's probably fair to say at 1 megawatt level, we didn't see any references to individuals, but we have certainly seen references to individuals as DNOs have looked to go down to 50 kilowatts. And as I said before, any information like that will be redacted and or aggregated at, let's say, a GSP level. And I know people have asked previously about going below 50 kilowatts. Again, once we get below 50 kilowatts, the level of magnitude will increase, well, exponentially from the 16,000 plus that we're likely to see down to 50 kilowatts. And then one would have to question the usefulness of it, because much of it would be redacted, because much of it relates to individuals, certainly solar panel level on domestic roofs.
Thanks, Steve. So we've got another question from Mike K, and this is about so apologies, sorry, I've just missed that. So yes, this is about I guess what we include in the updated version of the register that goes down to 50 kilowatts. So will it only be retrospective, or will it be populated with all existing sites? So
the plan is that all all connected sites will be recorded. So it's retrospective as well as the current ones. Accepted to connect will obviously be as they are, those that are in the current pipeline. However, in terms of sites that are providing flexibility services, DSR services, we may not be able to publish that retrospectively on day one. And again, similarly with reinforcement, if something's already connected, then we won't be looking to publish any of the reinforcement that was required as a result of making that connection that might have happened a number of years ago. So the idea is to publish exactly the same format, and Ofgem were very clear when we discussed initially discussed the lowering of that threshold down to 50 kilowatts, that they didn't expect any less data. They wanted the spreadsheet format to be exactly the same 57 columns. So that's absolutely what we're working towards.
Thanks, Steve. And final question. So this is from Nplay. So will the digitalization of ECR include the data published by IDNOs as well?
So the aim, yes, would be to include the data sets from all parties involved in publishing the ECR. So yeah, whatever we kind of discuss amongst the DNOs will also apply to IDNOs.
Thanks for confirming that, Bahij. Okay, so I think next on the agenda, we've got a break. So if we can all come back in 5 minutes, we'll try to make up the time in the subsequent sessions. So if we're back at 12:23, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. So hopefully everyone's back now. So the next few items on the agenda, so we'll kick off with those. So the first one is the DSO transition and our work on that. So I'll hand over to Steve Atkins, who is our chair for this work stream, to talk us through that. So over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Farina. Yeah, as Farina said, I'm chair of the DSO Transition Workstream. I'm DSO Transition Manager at Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks. Just going to the first slide, just to give you an overview of the DSO Transition Workstream. It's very much been around fulfilling this overarching role to progress the development and implementation of the least regrets pathway to distribution system operation in line with policy across the Open Networks program. So in 2017, when we started, we were looking at distribution system operation definition and functions. We looked at the principle of neutral market facilitation, which has driven everything we do through the Open Networks program, making sure that as natural monopolies that we're neutral facilitators of the market. Also looking at the commercial principles of the market as well. Very closely tied to that neutral market facilitation, how we facilitate the market and how people see opportunities within the market for their distributed energy resource. Then in 2018, we went into some detailed smart grid architecture modeling, looking at the various possible worlds that we might see become reality with DSO functions, how they might operate, what the governance might be, the relationship with the ESO and transmission companies, and modeled 5 different future worlds with these different attributes and roles and responsibilities and different actors as well. And that gave us a real insight into how best we deliver distribution system operation in the future. We then moved into assessing some of those, the impact of those worlds and the pathways, and we settled in short term on this sort of model of stronger coordination between DNOs and ESO and kind of joint operation, which we felt allowed for future changes to roles and responsibilities in the future, and didn't kind of set anything in stone. And since then we've been progressing that and moving that forward, and we've seen, we've been pleased to see much of the work that we've done over that period inform the baseline expectations from Ofgem for DSO in ED2. So the role of Workstream 3 has been to monitor the implementation of those elements that we identified. If we move to the next slide, Connor. So there's two key areas that we've been driving as Workstream 3, this DSO implementation plan, so that we can make sure that stakeholders are aware of how we're moving to this distribution system operation model. They can see networks progress on the various aspects, how they can fulfill those functions, where the benefits are going to come from within the business, where the opportunities are. And alongside that, making sure that we manage potential conflicts of interest and unintended consequences. Excuse me. So looking at making sure that we're aware that we put in mitigation actions as those arise, and some of those are specific to particular functions that we're looking at. Others are more widespread within the industry, but those two key items are being managed by Workstream 3 at the moment. So in this year, we're going to carry on identifying those key DSO initiatives and developments. monitor throughout the year. We're carrying out some stakeholder engagement in the early part of this this year to look at how we can best tailor the roadmap for people's consumption, see that it's easy to use and clear. And we've also updating the potential conflicts of interest and unintended consequences register as well, and maintaining that published version. Both of those are available on our on the Open Networks website, and you can download parts of those as well for for use within your business. These are quite key undertakings. They take a lot of work to keep updated. One of the things that we're interested in stakeholder engagement is to understand how it's being used and whether it is of use to you in your businesses. So we've got a couple of questions around these areas in terms of how they're being utilized at the moment. So I think if we move to the Slido questions. So the first one is, are you aware of the DSO implementation plan or conflicts of interest and unintended consequences registers? 4 choices there: DSO implementation plan only, the conflicts of interest and unintended consequences register only, both, or no, I was not aware of either. So it'd be great to understand that and see how that goes, and please be honest. Okay. That's really interesting. So about half of you not aware of either of those. Okay, so clearly a lot more work to do on making sure it's out there and people have got access to it. Should we go to the second question, Connor? Based on that and having heard of that, have you or do you intend to use the DSO implementation plan? So haven't used it, but plan to in the future, haven't used it, and probably not of interest to you. Thanks, Ellen. That's great. I'll put the link in there. Okay. Well, that's encouraging that that you feel that that's of use. We'll make sure that we put the links in the chat to both of those. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for your feedback. That's really useful.
Thank you, Steve. So I don't think we've got any questions here so far, but if people do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can pick them up afterwards. So next on the agenda, we've got Andy Wainwright, who will talk to us about what we've got planned this year in our whole energy systems work stream. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Verena. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andy Wainwright. I work for National Grid ESO. I chair the whole energy systems work stream within the Open Networks project. Now, the whole energy systems work stream is a bit different to the other work streams in that it looks more broadly across the ENA membership and brings in the gas network organisations to complement those from the electricity sector. We sort of don't really stop there. We also have opened the door to a number of key stakeholders in the workstream meetings, which includes the ADE, Energy UK, and probably of most relevance for what I'm going to talk about in a second, Energy Systems Catapult. And it really is a great place. It's a newer work stream. It's only been going for a couple of years, but it's a great place for helping to share learnings and information which facilitate sort of whole system coordination, particularly across gas and electricity. As we've sort of moved forwards and matured our work, we've sort of really focused on two main areas, which are shown at the bottom of this slide. The first is around supporting local authorities pull together their energy plans. And you can see we've got a product looking at doing that, which I'll come on to in the next slide. The second area is around whole system coordination and looking at how, as network organizations primarily, we can work together to optimize the transition to net zero. So I'll talk a bit more about the whole system CBA in a second, and also sort of pull out the work we're doing on the optioneering service at the moment. Finally, we have an overarching product where we look at the various whole system innovation projects that are happening across the membership and our project partners, and ensure that the learnings from those projects are fully embedded within the different network organizations on the work stream. So we just move across to the next slide. We've got the timeline of the activities we're looking to do in 2022. And this is probably the point where I'll provide a bit more context around what each of the products are. So on the whole system CBA, this is a product that was implemented in December 2020. It effectively provides an open and accessible cost-benefit analysis tool that is used by both gas and electricity sectors to understand the most efficient solution to a particular system need. And it's been recognised by Ofgem, so it's the CBA of choice that Ofgem use in the coordinated adjustment mechanism, which facilitates the transfer of regulated funds between one network organisation and another network organisation. So through 2021, we've been looking at how we're using the tool, and then from that, how we can shape and enhance the tool so it works better for the range of activities we need within the work stream. That's continuing into 2022. And I think it's commensurate with the sorts of activities we're looking at. It probably is a longer burn activity to get that sort of feedback. But in parallel, we've also listened to feedback from a lot of our stakeholders in trying to better explain how the whole system CBA fits alongside the common evaluation methodology that Ben talked about earlier in Workstream 1A. So we've got some ongoing work at the moment where the relevant SMEs from both products are coming together to discuss both the products and quite clearly lay out for stakeholders, such as those on the call now, how these two CBAs are complementary and work together. So the whole system optioneering service is something that's very much in action at the moment. Through 2021, we worked very closely with a large number of local authorities. I think there was over 100 authorities that engaged with the product to understand how both gas and electricity organisations could better provide a service to local authorities to help them develop their energy plans. We've taken all that feedback on board and we've played it back to the authorities in early 2022 on the preferred model going forwards. And we're currently consulting with authorities to understand how much interest there is in the particular service going forwards. So that will lead to a go, no-go decision in the next few weeks. And then if there is the appetite within the local authority community, we will then be looking at a phased implementation through the remainder of 2022 and into 2023. Our work on local area energy planning consists of two main activities in 2022. The first is sort of very much working with policymakers in this area. So BEIS and Ofgem are working together to assess the case for further action to support local area energy planning and a need for consistency across GB. And in parallel, Energy Systems Catapult are delivering work to understand how local area energy plans fit together within a national energy system strategy. Obviously, energy networks form a significant part of those energy plans, and the need for optimization and understanding of regional opportunities and challenges is very important. So we are absolutely sort of feeding that in both through our work in this product, but also the Workstream 4 meetings where we get regular updates from Energy System Catapult. In parallel, the product is looking at pulling together a best practice guide this year, which we want to help local authorities use to develop their energy plans. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we've got our overarching product looking at innovation projects across gas and electricity membership that have a whole system focus. So this is very much something that the workstream sort of take forward as a cohort and take it in turns to sort of present the projects and gain the views of other organisations within the workstream. So I think that concludes my presentation today, but I think, as is traditional for this webinar, we've got a Q&A. Is there a Slido as well, Farina? Yes, there we go, and a Slido. So could you please rank the Workstream 4 products in order of interest to you from highest to lowest? So that was P0, the monitoring of innovation projects, P1, whole system CBA, P4, local whole system optioneering service, and then finally P5, shaping local area energy planning.
Whilst we are waiting for that, I think people can post their questions in the chat or raise their hand. That would be great.
Okay, it's looking quite tight between the local area energy planning and the whole system CBA, which sort of reflects those sort of dual drivers we've got within the workstream. Okay, I think we're probably at a max, Farina. So thank you. That's really helpful, and I will be feeding this back to the Workstream 4 meeting early next month.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Andy. So next on the agenda, we've got an update on upcoming comms activities. So Emily Jones, who is our comms lead at ENA, will be talking us through that. So over to you, Emily.
Hi, everyone. So as an introduction, I am the Open Networks Communication Lead. I've been at ENA for just over a year now and come with about 10 years of industry experience and have so far really enjoyed working for the programme and really highlighting the amazing deliverables and outputs that the team have been doing. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. So really this is just an update to let you know about what's coming up and also the ways that you can be engaging with open networks moving forwards. I'm conscious that because this is a quarterly forum, whilst it's really helpful to be joining these sessions and getting updates and feeding back on work, you might also want to be engaging with us in other ways and more frequent ways to be able to give your feedback in different opportunities. So what we have published is stakeholder engagement activity overview. So really this is for the year ahead. However, you'll see the next few months have a bit more detail than the very end of the year, but hopefully it should give you an idea of everything we're planning for the year ahead, even down to noting things like community energy forums, when our next challenge groups are coming up, flexibility consultations, things like that, so you can start kind of looking in your diaries and checking availability. So what we do after each event, as you'll see, recently we held one for the Common Evaluation Methodology consultation. We publish everything online and then we link back to it. So it's sort of an easy source for you to be able to check any recordings, any presentation slides, all that kind of stuff. And we'll be doing the same for the Dissemination Forum today. The two upcoming webinars just to flag. The first one we've got on the 13th of April. We are hosting alongside Current News, looking at flexibility a bit more closely, and also the company's really doing amazing work on the ground. So Farina will be speaking at that alongside industry experts such as Flexitricity, Origami and Ripple Energy. And then our next event in April on the 20th is looking at our new baselining verification tool. So this is launching early next week. So we'll be going through the tool in a bit more detail and giving an opportunity for anyone to be asking questions. And if you'd like more information on that, then do feel free to sign up to our newsletter and you'll get a bit more information early next week on that launch. Speaking of our newsletter, so this goes out every couple of weeks. So every month we have a broad overview, which is this example from March. And then every couple of weeks, depending on the products that we're launching or the reports, the events that we're doing, it goes out. So you'll get regular reminders of how you can get involved with our work. So the main thing I just wanted to point out here is our latest and most recent kind of big piece of work was launching our 5 years online hub. So as you might be aware, Open Networks has been live since 2017. So 5 years of amazing work and achievements. And our online hub gives you an overview of everything that we've been doing since 2017 and just gives you some very good kind of snapshots on the deliverables. And then you can go into a bit more detail, look at case studies that we've got with network operators, for example. And then what we'll be doing is updating this throughout the year. We've got podcasts coming up, lots more events, some new videos that we'll be launching as well. So this will all be updated to this webpage. So I'll pop you the links on that. I sent the link round to the newsletter earlier. However, I'll resend that just so you've got that to hand. And as always, just feel free to ask any questions, share anything on social media. If you want any more details, then do feel free to let me know. Just see if there's. I don't think there's any questions. So I think we are going to go to our poll as an overview of the whole session. Great. So as you'll know, we've been doing polls throughout the forum just to be making sure that we are hitting the right marks, giving the best kind of information at the right level that you need. So this is really vital that we get this kind of feedback so we know for the next session what to be providing, what to be sharing, and do feel free to be completely honest and open. It's really, really helpful for us, as I'm sure you're all aware. Open Networks doesn't work without your feedback and your input. So if we just go to this first question, so considering the products presented in today's session, what is your opinion on the level of detail presented? I found it useful and received everything I was looking for, even if you maybe didn't know it previously, but you've realised that everything you've got is there. It should have had more technical detail, should have had less technical detail, and I would have liked more opportunity to share opinions and insights. So if we just go back to Slido, and as I said, all feedback is welcome. So we'll just leave it there for a few more seconds. So far it looks like we've pitched information at a fairly good level, which is great to hear. What we can do, Farina might be able to confirm this, but we might also be able just to leave an open form at the end of the session. So if people do want to give a bit more detailed feedback, they can do. And as always, our email address, opennetworks@energynetworks.org, is the right one to be emailing if you've got any additional thoughts.
Thanks, Emily. I think the next question that we have is a free text question where people can just share general suggestions. I think that's the one we can leave open until the end of the day to give people a chance to reflect on the session from today. I think with this one, we've got about 14 responses now. I think with the previous polls as well, I think that was probably what we were getting at the time. I think it's really useful to see this feedback, and I think clearly there is appetite amongst some people to kind of start to see a bit more technical detail on it. And I think, yeah, we'll reflect on the feedback across all of the other areas as well and see how we can best, tailor the sessions to offer what you are looking for. Okay, so should we move on to the next question then? So I think, as I mentioned previously, I think this is just more an opportunity to share more open feedback with us. I think we recognize previous ones have been quite binary polls. So I think this is really an opportunity for people to give us any suggestions how we could, better facilitate these sessions, what type of content you prefer, or, if or anything else at all. I think, as Emily also mentioned, we've got, we've also got an inbox where you can kind of send us any questions, queries, or any comments. So I think we'll leave this poll open until the end of the day. I think, Connor, if you move back to the slides, just recap some of maybe perhaps go to the next one. So I think it's been a really helpful session today, and I think it's been really good from our side to see all the engagement and the participation. So I think at one point we had almost 46 people, and I think particularly on the products, we've got lots of feedback, comments, and things that we should take away and consider. So thank you all very much for that. As I mentioned before, if there are any further questions, feel free to kind of drop them to us on the email address here. So we will share a link to the video recording from today and a set of we'll share a link to the updated slides as well from today.